Hello and welcome to our live broadcast. I am so thrilled to have each and every one of you live with us tonight here on More Radio Network. We're having a conversation of the time. We're having a conversation to speak to where we are here in the United States, not only in the United States, but worldwide. We wanted to take a moment and come together collectively to say, as a community, how can we combat, what effort can we provide in order to systematically and in a very meaningful way look at inequality and equity and policy. But we didn't want to separate that by religious beliefs or your expertise. We want to have a collective conversation of everyone aboard. So I'm so pleased to have such a diverse panel of individuals with me tonight, and I'm going to get a chance to introduce or have them introduce themselves in just a moment. So now that you know the purpose of our show, the purpose of our show is to provide prayer and information in order to bring about a change. And so we're going to begin every show with at least a minute of prayer, but we want to ground this. We want to look at a historical moment, like how do we change what's going on throughout the United States? And one way to do that is to learn from our past and bring that knowledge and bring everything that we know from what we've been through in the past to help inform us. And oh my goodness, can we not be encouraged? When you look at the civil rights movement, we were successful at bringing about change in the United States. When you look at where we came from Jim Crow laws, back to sharecropping, back to, oh my goodness, the 30 years of hanging, of lynching in America to where we are today. This journey that we're on, we need to always see the glass as half full. We're not there yet, but this glass is half full. And on behalf of all of our ancestors that came before us and fought a good fight, that you and I are even here today, so that we could talk about how to move this forward. How do we change what's happening today so that our sons and daughters do not have to repeat what we see here in America today? So on that, as you view our podcast, you're going to be looking at a video clip that we have. We're going to show a small video clip of the civil rights movement, and we're showing this clip to you in regards to the civil rights movement and how it was organized in a systematic way to bring about a change. And so as you see those clips, I want you to feel in your spirit that we have done this before, and we've done it well.
Reverend Martin Luther King's nonviolent movement was inspired by the teachings of Indian leader Mahatma Gandhi. Throughout the South, King put the spotlight on prejudice.
Mississippi is a state that has consistently resisted any move to rid itself of racism.
Led by King, millions of blacks took to the streets for peaceful protest, as well as civil disobedience actions and economic boycotts.
You've got to keep the white and the black separate.
The nonviolent movement was tested in places like Birmingham, Alabama. William Bell is the city's current mayor.
During that period of time, you had people who were being murdered, homes being bombed, churches being bombed, and there was a sense that nothing would ever change here in Birmingham or the South. There was a sense that evil would prevail.
In 1965, a march for voting rights in Selma, Alabama went down in history as Bloody Sunday. Congressman John Lewis led the march.
They came toward us, beating us with nightsticks, trampling us with horses, releasing the tear gas. I was hit in the head by a state trooper with a nightstick. I had a concussion at the bridge. I thought I was going to die.
Andrew Young, one of King's closest aides, called for calm against a backdrop of outrage.
And if we had started guerrilla warfare in America's cities, if we had given in to terrorism, we could not have won, but America could not have survived.
In Birmingham, images of police using attack dogs and fire hoses to disperse protesting school children were broadcast around the world. Attorney Richard Cohen on the impact of those pictures.
The violence was being perpetrated by the oppressors, not the oppressed, and that was an incredibly powerful message, an incredibly important tool during the movement.
In August 1963, thousands of African Americans and whites gathered for the March on Washington. It was peaceful, with no arrests. Just weeks after the March on Washington, tragedy struck here in Birmingham after a bomb exploded beneath the 16th Street Baptist Church during Sunday school classes. 4 young girls were killed and 23 others were injured. It was an awful blow for Dr. King and the civil rights movement. Shirley Gavin Floyd, a friend of one of the victims, was traumatized by the hate killings.
Well, I was scared to look at a white person. I was scared to go anywhere I thought a white person was, because I really believed that that could easily happen to me.
Many blacks wanted to retaliate, among them Congressman Bobby Rush, who in the 1960s was a member of the militant group known as the Black Panthers.
I was not a supporter of Dr. King. I thought that Dr. King was too milquetoast, too passive, and I didn't understand the power of nonviolence. And so I didn't adhere to his philosophy and turned the other cheek.
Ben Jealous, president of the nation's oldest civil rights organization, says the nonviolent campaign won American hearts and minds.
The movement was moving towards a crescendo that we would see in 64 and 65 when landmark civil rights legislation was passed.
Historians say despite the setbacks, the nonviolent movement spurred lasting results towards providing equal rights and freedom for all Americans. Chris Simpkins, VOA News, Montgomery, Alabama.
So let's band together and let's take that same spirit and let's move forward and let's see how together we can combat what's happening in America with prayer, information, and action. So I'm so pleased tonight to have, oh my goodness, a wonderful panel of people joining me tonight. I'm gonna ask you if you can introduce yourselves, because you know I can talk forever, you guys all know that. And so I'm gonna start with Ms. Kenyatta Bakeer.
Hi, greetings. Thank you so much, Anissa, for inviting me tonight, Dr. McNeil. And it's an honor and a privilege to be able to share space with you and all of the panelists tonight. My background is 28 years in education, specifically in early childhood education. I have been a teacher, a director, a principal. Currently, I'm a professor with the Los Angeles Community College District, and as well a consultant in early childhood ed programs. And then also I work for a nonprofit that works on anti-bias and anti-racist issues, and it's called Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative. But don't let the title throw you off. We are an interfaith space that works with all backgrounds. And lastly, I am also a proud Black Lives Matter member.
Wonderful, and welcome, Kenyatta, welcome. All right, Annette.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. McNeil, for inviting me. I'm so thrilled to be here in the space with all of you discussing this very important topic at this very critical time in our history. I am a higher education administrator, and I work for the UC system. But I also am a consultant and a speaker on women's leadership issues. I work throughout the state to help women become prepared to run for office, because we need more women's voices and more women's energy at the table for our policy making decisions. So that's where I spend a lot of my time when I'm not doing work in the education space, where I've been for the last about 10 years now, and work with our local communities and our statewide representatives to help promote policies and equity issues throughout the state. So I am very thrilled to be here and talking to all of you. Thank you.
Wonderful, and welcome, Annette. We're pleased to have you. Welcome. Dr. Ivey.
Well, good evening, good afternoon, and hello to everyone. It is an absolute pleasure to be here with you all. My name again is Dr. Ray Ivey. I am an educator by trade. I've been working in education since 1998. Currently a professor for Johns Hopkins in the Urban Teachers Residency Program here in the DC area, primarily working and focused on preparing secondary mathematics teachers, teachers to understand how to lead trauma-informed classroom spaces, and try to recruit more Black teachers to be inside of classrooms to touch the lives of young people. In addition to that, I do a lot of consulting on education program development, young men leadership programming, and work with fiscal efficiencies for nonprofit organizations trying to become more stable in their processes for raising money and thinking through creating outcomes or measuring their outcomes to push for their campaigns for development.
Wonderful. Welcome, Dr. Ivey. Welcome. And last but definitely not least, we have Dr. Amanda Sion Walker. Dr. Walker.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Amanda Sion Walker. I am a licensed clinical psychologist here in Los Angeles in California. And I work with the Mental Health and Social Justice Clinic as a clinician, working primarily with clients who've experienced trauma and multiple traumas.
And I have the privilege of working with Dr. Walker every day. She is and she's going to kill me for saying this, audience, so I'll say it out there to you, America. She is our lead clinician, our clinical supervisor for our clinic. And my name is Dr. Anissa McNeil, and I had the privilege, my company, Education Works, we had the privilege of writing the trauma-informed care program for Los Angeles County for the Department of Public Health, and rolling that program out to more than 900 agencies here in Los Angeles. So when it comes to trauma, that is something that our agency understands very well. My company is also called Education Works. So when it comes to trauma and educating individuals and institutions and our teaching professions and our social workers about how do we work with trauma, that's what my company, Education Works, that's what we do very well. And we've extended that not only in our mental health and social justice clinic, that we marry that expertise to social justice. Now that you have a mental health concern, how do we still make you a viable member of our community? We don't let go of anyone's hand. And so we have a mental health and social justice clinic. And then I decided, hey, like that wasn't enough work to do. Why don't I take this abroad? And so I have 5 schools outside of the country. I have a school in Ethiopia. Hi, Ethiopia. And I want to say hello to you. My phone has been bombarded from every one of you there in Ethiopia. I love and appreciate you. I have a school in Kenya. Hi, everyone in Kenya. Like the same goes for you. You're calling my home, you're texting me, you're WhatsApping me at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning to make sure that I'm okay. I love you guys. The same goes for Uganda. How are you in Kampala? How are you? Yes. And then we have a school in Haiti. How are you, Ayati? How are you in the Caribbean? Absolutely. And my last school there is in South Africa. Sabonie, hello, my friends. And thank you so much as I see the panel light up here. You can see them. It's very late there. You can see them all over the world listening. So I want to welcome you. But now I want to dive down. I want to go deep into the information that we want to share with you this evening. why you are joining us here on More Radio Network. We came here tonight to answer one question for you. And this question has been asked all over social media. This came at the at the tragic death of a Mr. George Floyd. We are where we are in our country, not only for George Floyd, but for the 78 other lives that we know of, that part that we know of, that's documented, that have their lives are gone at the hands of police. So, as we want to do every night, we want to take just a moment and have a silent prayer with each other. Just a moment to recognize the Father. No matter what your religious belief is, take a moment. Thank you, guys. Thank you. And so for all of my friends that say to me, because they know that I'm a Christian, you guys, so they say, Dr. McNeil, are you leaving your faith out? Absolutely not. So when I talk to the both of you, all of you that's on the line with me, I told you what, faith and work go together. They're not separate. So we want to dive into this question tonight. How can a police officer violate my civil rights? How can a police officer murder me on the street and we can't file charges for that? Why is that so? Why does it appear that it takes almost an act of God in order for us to charge them? So we want to introduce, instead of us asking how and why, we want to now dive deep into qualified immunity. Qualified immunity. How many of you have heard of qualified immunity? Qualified immunity came as a part of the Civil Rights Act of 1871. Congress allowed individuals in the Civil Rights Act of 1871, Congress allowed individuals to sue state and local officials, including police officers that violated their rights. Starting in 1967, the Supreme Court began gutting the law by inventing the doctrine of qualified immunity. So we don't want to use, this is a part of a letter that we received. So the Supreme Court in 1967 introduced qualified immunity, which states in our law that this rule states that it created that no police officer or elected state and local official may be held or charged for the violation of civil rights. So this qualified immunity, when we look at it in the books, when you look at it, for all of you I'm going to Google that, Dr. McNeil, please do. And the first document that you're going to come up with on Google is the document that each one of our panelists has in front of them. And that first document is a document you should read deeply, because it walks you through how from 1967 to 2005, our Supreme Court has introduced this and it has remained. Well, this now is a conversation in our country about qualified immunity. So I'm going to open up to our panel to discuss what you understand about qualified immunity. Any one of you, jump in. Not all at once.
Well, I'll jump in. I read what was stated, and I'll have to be honest, I was aware of it, but not in the whole term, of the official title, right? Because as I said, my last introduction was I'm a Black Lives Matter member. And most recently, we're an organization that's almost 7 years old. So in the last couple of years, before that, and when we came out of the Trayvon Martin, his whole murder, that was the first part of us. So we really were like on the ground kind of people. A great deal of us went to Ferguson, to be a part of that movement. And we've grown as an organization, right? So what's also known is that we don't have any quote unquote leaders, right? We may have lead organizers, but we all lead this work together. So the last couple of years, we really kind of started working in that political front, because what I spoke to, as well as some other members as well, is that we originally weren't into the policy, right, and public policy, but we felt if we were going to be able to move as an organization and to get some things handled, we were going to have to participate in that. So interestingly enough, we started participating in California as it relates to getting specific measures passed as it relates to police brutality, and also as well as being able to have the families to retrieve the files and the documents of their family members that have been murdered, because in the past we couldn't access those records. So I say all of that to say it's been some progress in that realm of being able to prosecute, right? Also, if you listen most recently, Keith Ellison, who was the Attorney General for Minneapolis, has the whole case, right, for the 4 officers, and is in the process of charging them. So I guess with qualified immunity, it was originally done because people were quote unquote making frivolous claims. We don't know if that's to be true, but that was what the statement was. We know now that a frivolous claim, that we know that murder is not a frivolous claim, right? We know that being shot with rubber bullets, like what just happened this past few days in Los Angeles. I have many friends who were shot directly in the face with rubber bullets, or they were sprayed with pepper spray, their mask taken down and sprayed with pepper spray. And now we also know that we have video, right? So that's the saving grace for a lot of us, because in the 60s and in the 1870s, we didn't have video. So my stance is that as I'm in agreement with you in delving into a lot of these laws that we have, so that we can take that information and that we can fight and create new law. So that's kind of my side of it.
Okay. Anyone else want to add to your understanding of what qualified immunity is?
Well, the most troubling aspect of this law is that you must have clearly established laws for this law to be deemed justifiable in the court of law. But to have it deemed established, you have to have someone who's convicted. And then the law has to match exactly the qualification of the previous law for the current case to be deemed justifiable. So it's the way it's currently written, it's especially troubling, because unless someone is convicted for your specific case in the specific elements of the case, there's no way to apply the law. So it's written so that the person who's using it the case is going to be dismissed. So, which means that even if you try and reapply the law just after the case is done, unless you had a conviction, you don't have a foundation to base the current law on. So delving into this and really deconstructing it and strengthening it so that it has some teeth so it can be applied is really the critical element that has to be done. And that's the discussion we need to have. How can we make this a policy that can actually be used for everyone instead of just for the benefit of law enforcement?
Right. And then when you look at the law, let's go back to when the law was first written in 1967. So from 1967, this was meant and established because it violated a previous case. So there was a case before the Supreme Court, there was a case before the Superior Court of the state, and that person was charged. And so that set the precedent for this law to have an established case. So then they said, wait, hold on, let's give this immunity clause that says, wait, you're a police officer. We can't be able to charge you. In addition to that, the law from I'm trying to go in steps instead of taking out chunks of this information step by step. So from 2014, I really want to start at 2001. From 2001 till today, this law has gone through the judicial application of the Saucer two-step. And it's also been found to be highly unclear, not being able to be established. So much so that even the lawmakers themselves are saying this law is unclear. So this is my question to America and to and that's why DAs have to get involved. So then you say, wait a second. Here I am, I've witnessed the violation of someone's Civil Rights Act by a police officer or an elected official. Why can't I place charges? Why do I have to then wait for the DA and for others to get involved before we can place charges? And it starts here. If they're not convicted or charged at the local level, this doesn't stand. Now, just think about this public policy on our books. How many of us have read this law through and through? Because if you read it through and through, you're going to be shocked, as I was, because when I read it completely yesterday, I was appalled to find out, wait a minute, how can we even enact this? So if we as citizens can't enact it, how can a police officer stand behind it? Then that begs the question, should this law be on the books? Should this law be on the books? Is this law appropriate for today? And that takes us to this letter that was written by Justin Amash. He's a member of Congress. And if you bear with me for just a moment, I'm going to take the time and just read through his letter, especially the second, third, and the fourth paragraph of this letter. And I want to highlight that. It says, "Dear colleague, please join me in sponsoring the ending the Qualified Immunity Act to eliminate qualified immunity and restore America's ability to obtain relief when police officers violate their constitutional secured rights. As a part of the Civil Rights Act of 1871, Congress allowed individuals to sue state and local officials, including police officers who violated their rights. Starting in 1967, the Supreme Court began gutting the law by inventing the doctrine of qualified immunity. Under qualified immunity, police are immune from liability unless the person whose right they violated can show that there is a previous case in the same jurisdiction involving the exact same facts in which a court deemed the actions to be constitutional violation. This rule has sharply narrowed the situations in which police can be held liable, even for the truly heinous rights violated, and it creates a disincentivized to bring cases in the first place. If a plaintiff knows that there is no prior case that is identical to theirs, they may decline to either file a lawsuit because they are very unlikely to win. Even if the plaintiff does file a case, the judge may dismiss it on qualified immunity grounds and decline to decide whether the plaintiff's rights were violated, meaning the constitutional precedent still isn't established. And so the next plaintiff still cannot recover. So do you see how this law and this And Justin Amash, he goes on, he has 3 other paragraphs here, and this letter is available here at More Radio Network. So can you see how this law, the way it is written on the books, so if a person is not convicted for the exact same thing that I'm doing, sitting here at the radio network, at the left side of the studio with my hands crossed, I mean, there's so many details that go into a crime, then you have no grounding to bring another lawsuit forward. How many people die in the exact same manner? How many of us experience racism in the exact same manner?
And not just that, you know, in order for there to be the qualified immunity, there has to be a first case. So it's like if no one files their case, then there's never a first case. So then there's never a qualifier for the next case, because that first case couldn't even get through. So, you know, how long does that go on before we finally decide that something has to be the first case in order to qualify what comes after it as another case? We don't even have that. So not only does it have to be identical, it has to be identical to something that can't even get through, because there has to be something before it for it to get through. It's like a catch-22.
It's like the dog chasing his tail. And we've been chasing that since 1967, since this law came on the books. It's like a dog chasing his tail. Something wrong happened to me. 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 We've been singing this song since 1967, since this went on the books. And that's why we're all here tonight, to encourage our community members to write their elected officials to revamp or get rid of this law. Now, this is Dr. Anissa McNeil. I'm for ending this qualified immunity. I think we can do better than this. I'm for ending it. I don't see how this has benefited our society at all. I see how it has created a loophole for those who have position and power and authority on our streets to create inequality, and especially to my race of people, to the African American race. And so and help me if you guys see the purpose of this being on our books. I just don't.
Well, you know, I'm gonna chime in. I definitely don't see the purpose. And we know that this is a white supremacist society. I mean, we know that if we go back to 400 years, this society was created, 1776. That's why I don't celebrate the whole July 4th. Juneteenth is our day, right? So a lot of us didn't even know that we were emancipated, right? Until 2 years later. So this is specifically done to keep us in this chasing, as you say, chasing our tail. This is not something that they didn't make this law to create equality. They created it to be, unequal, so that folks would fall into this stance of having to continue to chase their tail. And I agree with you. Either we call, which we do constantly, you call out your politicians, you call your council members, you start at the local level, right? Then you start at the state level. Black Lives Matter, we did 55 demands that cover housing, food insecurity, education, and we listened to the community, and we did it on a local level with our council members, as well as with the mayor, as well as with the governor. And we just keep pushing, and unfortunately now we see we're in our 4th or 5th day of an uprising, not just in Los Angeles, but nationwide. There's 35 cities that have just said, enough, it's too much. We can't let another person die. We've had 601 people to be murdered in Los Angeles at the hands of police since 2012. That doesn't count with the previous one, right? So we know that the system is corrupt. And I agree with you. You have to, put it in writing. We can't just say it's corrupt. We have to, be diligent.
And we want to use hard information here. So if you go to USA Today, In USA Today on May 30th of 2020, they published an article titled, "Police Act Like Laws Don't Apply to Them Because of Qualified Immunity." They're right. That was the title of the article. Again, that's USA Today. You can go there and pull up this article. And there, this article that was written by Patrick Giacomo and Anya Bidwell. They wrote this article, and it states within their article that the Supreme Court created qualified immunity in 1982. With that novel invention, the court granted all government officials immunity from violating constitutional and civil rights unless the victim of those violations can show that their rights were clearly established. And the article goes on to talk about a virtually unlimited protection. And it says, it gives an example. It says, for instance, last November, the Sixth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals held that Tennessee cops who allowed their police dogs to bite a surrendered suspect did not violate clearly established law. There, the victim cited a case where the same court earlier held that it was unconstitutional for officers to sick their dog on a suspect who had surrendered by lying on the ground with his hands to his side. That was not sufficient, the court reasoned, because the victim had not surrendered by lying down. He had surrendered by sitting on the ground and raising his hands. So there we go. Remember when we talked about earlier, it has to be identical. So there's a difference between lying on the ground and raising your hand and sitting on the ground and raising your hand. And that one simple act allowed them to claim qualified immunity. Their case was dismissed.
Well, you know, this is just another example, like a lot of people have said, oh, we've got to fix the system. The system is broken. Yeah. The system is not broken. It's working exactly as it was designed to do.
Exactly.
So until we have that mindset and start thinking that we've got to not just get rid of things, but deconstruct and rebuild, we're not going to be able to change. So this is a perfect example of that exact.
We've got to deconstruct, we've got to end this. And then they go on here in their article, it says, screaming into the void. It says, and in February, the Fifth Circuit U.S. Supreme Court appeals had that the Texas prison guard who pepper sprayed an inmate in his locked cell for no reason did not violate clearly established law because a similar cited cases involved guards who had hit and tased inmates for no reason, rather than pepper spraying them for no reason. In both cases, the officers were granted qualified immunity. When the Supreme Court conceived qualified immunity, it promised that the rule would not provide a license to lawless conduct for government officials. But that's not what we've seen. Yes, Dr. Ivey.
So, interesting as I was doing research on this, I found that 1982 lawsuit that gets to the Supreme Court actually stems from a case from a gentleman by the name of A. Ernest Fitzgerald.
Yeah.
Who sues the Nixon administration for getting wrongfully terminated after he was a whistleblower who had made it known that one of the government contracts for the production of a fleet of aircraft was $2 billion over budget. Fast forward, he gets fired, and then it comes $2 billion over budget. He gets fired, but it comes out on tapes that Nixon fired him, while he's talking to his aides. Now, as he goes back and then attempts to sue Nixon, Nixon is protected under the presidential immunity. Mm-hmm. But all of his aides this law is applied to them. So that the hope and idea of eliminating frivolous lawsuits. So there's a couple things that were interesting about this case to me, and then moving forward, thinking through what does this actual ramifications have for us today, and not paying attention to things like this.
Yes.
One, the number of judges that Trump has appointed, he is now a second of all the presidents since Carter in appointing judges to federal positions. So the individuals who are deciding these cases before they get to go to the Supreme Court or determine if even qualified immunity can be used, they've stacked the deck. And it's very difficult for these things to occur. So when we hear even the beginning of the charges for Brother Floyd of, we don't know if we can charge him, there's a reason why they were saying that. Right. Now, as much as we can see it clear as day, and break it down as simple as possible, is as you said, for my students who are watching, if this hasn't occurred in the exact same way, so not only is this young man, I'm sorry, the gentleman, the elderly gentleman who was homeless, who had broke into the house and had surrendered to the police, because he is not doing the same thing that someone else did, the police are not liable for what they've done. So if a police officer shoots a dog or attempts to shoot a dog and makes mistakes and shoots a child, which actually happened last year, right, because there is no actual case that a police officer cannot feel threatened by a dog and try to defend themselves and inadvertently shoot a child, there is no liability. Last thing I want to say on this one, I've been looking up how many cases have actually gone through where a police officer has actually received jail time. And I was surprised at how many of these major news stories that have gone viral, where I was hard pressed to find a police officer who had been convicted and charged. But I did find one. Do you all remember Justine Demond?
Yes.
The Australian white woman who made a phone call and a police officer inadvertently shot her when she ran up to his window. It was the only situation I found where it was a white woman shot by a black police officer, black Somali police officer who was given 15 years in prison sentence. So it's
her case, yeah.
To Annette's point, this is set up.
That's the only one on the books.
Yeah, us not.
Did you know how many? Could you tell them, Dr. Ivey, since you looked it up also, how many cases have we tried to put on the books?
I want to say it was 256. Is that the number?
Mm-hmm. In 1 year, yes. How many cases have we tried?
Oh, so no, 256 since 2012.
Mm-hmm. That's what I found, the same statistic here. And the reason why I'm pressing this USA Today article that was written on May 30th. And I just want to make sure I'm saying this correctly. May 30th was that date on our calendar this year. May 30th was a Saturday. So this article reports that on Monday, on June 1st, the Supreme Court will announce whether it will hear some of those cases and reconsider the doctrine of qualified immunity. So do you all know that this just went up before the Supreme Court on Monday? Here we sit together on June 3rd, right? On June 1st, this just went before them. And I tried, but I didn't have a chance to look up and see exactly what the Supreme Court ruled on this. But I'm going to continue with the second to the last sentence of this article. It says, on Monday, the Supreme Court will announce whether it will hear some of those cases and reconsider the doctrine of qualified immunity. If it does, there is hope that the court will revoke the license to lawless conduct if granted government officials in 1982. If it does not, lack of accountability will continue to rule the day, and the promise of the Bill of Rights will be a matter of judicial grace rather than a constitutional right. That, ladies and gentlemen, happened on Monday. How many of us are looking at the Supreme Court rulings to see what happened so that our community no longer has to prove that in an identical manner with the previous case on the books that you have violated my civil rights. Because if the Supreme Court, and I don't know, as I sit here on the radio, I tried to find out before I got here, but I don't know. So if you know the answer to that, please join our conversation. Call us at 877-227-0880. Call us here at More Radio Network. We want to hear from you. If you know the answer to that, please let me know. But if you also want to write your elected official, please give us a call here at More Radio Network. We want to give you a sample letter that you can send to your elected official. If you believe like I believe that this law has got to come off the books. There's no way for us to have equity, for us to have the full intent of our civil rights with this law on the books. We can't change what's happening to us if we are not informed in detail. Remember when your mother was telling you, read everything, baby. The devil is in the details. I tell my sons that. You have to read everything completely, son, because the devil is in the details. So how many of us actually read the law, and read the details? That's why we have this show. Because many of us are perishing. Many of us are suffering in our communities, in our country, but we don't know how to stop it. This is how. Go on the website, go to the Supreme Court website, see the ruling. What did they rule in regards to qualified immunity? What did they rule? Is it still on the books? Did they hear any cases? Or did they dismiss all the cases? Because now we know that there's only one person that has been convicted. One police officer serving 15 years. That's all Dr. Ivey and I could find. And if anyone knows any additional information, please call us here at More Radio Network. Our intent is never to misguide you, but to give you all that we know to be true.
I did look up one other case, and I do not recall it because I was just looking up so much, but the person only served 1 year, and it was something in relation to, I don't know if the
was
person.
It the Walter Scott case? That in North Carolina?
Yeah, I think it was.
Okay.
Yeah. The police officer was chasing the gentleman, running back to him and shot him twice.
Right.
Yeah, he got a 20-year prison sentence. I never heard how long he actually served.
Well, maybe that wasn't it. It was another one where they did a full year, and then they released him. So
right.
It could be the same. But even if we're talking about, my comment is this: even if we're talking about 1, 2, 3 out of the hundreds and probably even thousands of people that have had this to happen. The other thing is that I want to lift up that this was and not because my faith is Islam, I'm an interfaith person. We're talking about a Black Muslim being done like this. So that meant that they wanted to make sure that they made an example, right? Because we know what the rules have been with the Muslim ban as well. So all of that falls under that umbrella, his Black skin and his religion, unfortunately. The reason I was looking up about 5 minutes ago, I don't know where the rest of you are, but in Los Angeles, there was a pretty heavy earthquake about 5 minutes ago. I don't know if your listeners are. So that was me looking up like, what? And I'm an LA native, but I don't usually, even get off the couch, but I almost moved on that one. That might have been about 7 something. But I'm grateful that you went in more detail and we looked up with the Supreme Court. And my question is, because I always like to play the other side of it, conveniently, we see that this is June 1st, right? What has been happening in the last few days? It's not just one city, it's not just LA, it's not like the uprising of 92, right? This is all across the nation, even in London, even in Berlin, it's all over the world. So in Amsterdam, they had 100,000 people in the square. So, now other nations are looking at us, right? And so the United States being this powerhouse, the Supreme Court is going to have to step up. And so they're feeling embarrassed. That's what I think is happening, and why they're not changing these rules because they feel it's the right thing to do. They're changing it because they're embarrassed.
Right. And well, I also think it goes back to what Dr. Martin Luther King said in 1965. When you have power, when you have authority to oppress a people, you don't give up that power and authority because time has passed or you feel embarrassed. You only give up that time and authority because you're pressured to do that, and those individuals now stand up for their right. I'm gonna stay away from the comment about America being embarrassed, because that's gonna take me on a different path than I want to go on with our current administration.
I agree with you. They were pressured. They were pressured. I agree with you on that.
But we have to keep applying pressure. But I'd like to take a different lens at that, Kenyatta. I want to say it feels almost strategic that while our heads are looking to the left, looking at who's protesting, who's doing this, there's a whole nother game going on to the right, and none of us are paying attention. That's why I have this show about information and policy, because we need everybody. We need the person that's protesting, and we need the people that are paying attention to the policies and the laws, because as a collective group of people, we have to stay diligent on all fronts. I've never seen in any country, and I'm down in South Africa a few times out of the year, I've never seen a group in power give up power and privilege because they feel embarrassed. Not at all. Not even because they feel ashamed. So we can't make it a moral issue. We can't make it a time issue, because if we were looking at time here in America, we have 224 years of slavery and 400 plus years after that. So time is not going to resolve this. So what we have to do now is look at these laws on the books, the policies that are in procedures that are in our community. The way to bring about a systemic, everlasting change is to change the law. The same way they did in 1965, they began the Civil Rights Act movement, and in 1960, we had the Civil Rights Act. So we have to keep that pressure for the Civil Rights Act to be in full effect. And and to that end, this radio show has really caused me to go digging for the facts. I, like Dr. Ivey, I was up last night going, what? Well, wait a minute, let's go back here. And how, because of one case, this came up. And that had to do with our former President Nixon. And it's been on the books ever since.
I wanted to also just interject real quick.
Sure.
I'm glad you said, and I said embarrassment, thinking from, a perspective. We know that it's pressure, right? And we know that that's how the Civil Rights Act even came about, right? We know how much, we know how much King was visiting, right, in the White House and really, putting them really to the fire and saying, listen, this has to happen, right? And we know that the boycotts and how long those boycotts went on, right? So it starts with the people, right? As a person who's in this movement, protesting as we know it, and just to be very fair, we know that, folks are wanting to lift up that, there's looters and protesters, they're putting them together, right? The protesters are protesting what is happening. They are in the streets. They're putting their lives on the line, right? They're being shot with rubber bullets, right?
Absolutely.
We this is, reminiscent of the Civil Rights Movement. My father was a part of that, and probably some of our parents on this call. He's saying it, my father said it's almost identical, right? So we know that history repeats itself. And I was doing my little math. I'm not that great at it, but I can count. If you look at it from 65 to 92, was about 27, 28 years, right? 92 to present day is about 28 years. So the people are uprising during these, like, you know, almost these secular kind of things, right? It's almost 28, 30 years. They're like, enough, we can't. And you start to see the population just happen. And I'm proud of the young folks. The young folks are even in the streets. They are. Now, what I'm not proud of is some, I'm not saying all, some are saying, you know, we're not our ancestors. We'll fight back. We know what our ancestors did to enable us to even have the freedoms that we have here. So we don't have to, like I always tell folks, all this reinventing the wheel. Black Lives Matter looks at the Black Panthers movement. We look at the different folks in the civil rights and what they've done to be able to push our cause. Everything is done in strategy. It's never done on emotion.
Right, and I look at that. Anyone else have a comment? Anyone else have a comment?
Two things.
Go ahead, Dr. Ivey.
One, we got to pay attention to the fact that, you know, getting Trump out of here so that we can have the next president appoint someone on the Supreme Court that represents us. We cannot afford to lose a voice like Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I know she's just holding on. But her and Justice Sotomayor, I think that in their dissension against qualified immunity, wrote something that was really poignant to me. It just popped out, it's been ringing in my ears since I've read it. It was this law allows police to shoot first and think second.
Yes.
And I think what is occurring with everything we're seeing in the media with, you know, even as police are using tear gas, shooting rubber bullets into crowds, and harassing peaceful protesters, and we're seeing it time and time and over again, it's becoming adamantly clear that this qualified immunity should not be just given a blanket immunity to police officers who are not doing their job. I mean, we understand that these people were peaceful. Any of you all who saw what happened in DC right here by the right behind the White House, where they tear gassed the crowd. So listening to the mayor here in DC, her police chief, this wasn't her staff, this wasn't the DC police officers, but for them to clear a space just so Trump could walk across a park into the front of the church. I'm appalled by the fact that, you know, this is how we treat people. The fact that he's making threats to call martial law. And again, the people who, I mean, the individuals who would be following suit, following these orders, would be covered by qualified immunity to be able to push people into their homes against their, you know, their will, stop them from their expressing their First Amendment rights to be able to protest and be able to gather. These young people, and I got so many of my students who are out here in the streets risking their lives, you know, it's a pandemic and we're out here.
Exactly.
And it's scary to me that we can risk these things and people still not hear it and still not get it.
And still not get it. My youngest son, Randy, was so, Mom, I have to go protest. And he went down in Orange County and he walked in protest. And he said, Mom, I walked, I kept my hands by my side and I just walked in the protest, but I had to walk. I have to show my face for what is happening to our people. Now, of course, as a mom, I'm concerned. I'm for his safety. But when I think about it as a whole, we cannot limit what we do to combat this inequality, this racism to one act. And yes, just like my son and 1,000 other young African-American, young Americans, you see Americans out there of all nationalities that are peacefully protesting. We need that. But we also need these conversations like we are having today, because while they were protesting, the Supreme Court was deciding if this will stay on the books. We have got to have balance. And if we look back at the civil rights movement, you'll notice that They peacefully protested, but they did not remove their eyes from the law. They knew strategically what laws they needed to change, how they needed to change it. They knew strategically and financially that boycotting buses would cripple cities. So that's what I'm asking us to do. I'm asking us to do everything, to protest and to have the information so that we can make the changes on the rule books so that we can live better. It will be a sad day. I sit here, I'm 48 years old. My oldest son is 21. And Kenyatta pointed out that this happens every 25, 28 years. I will be tearful if my son is now 48 years old and he's having this same conversation about what's happening in America. We've got to do something. If you want this letter, because we have 3 minutes left on the air, so I'm sorry, I have to do a call to action. So now we know that the Supreme Court looked at this, and here on this show, Wednesday at 6 p.m., we're gonna give you an update. What did the Supreme Court decide? What information do we have? We're gonna be right here every Wednesday covering this. But if you'd like a sample letter, you say, Dr. McNeil, I wanna address it. I wanna be a part of it. I want the letter. We will email that letter to you. Email us here at info@moreradionetwork.com. And we will email that letter to you. Call us up. If you say, Dr. McNeil, I don't have email, I don't have a computer, I don't have a printer, that's okay. Call us up at 877-227-0880, and I will mail it to you. I'll mail it to you, and I'll mail an envelope so you can mail it to your elected official. I want to just break down every barrier for us to be involved. If you say, well, Dr. McNeil, I just don't know. I'm going to tune in next week to see what the Supreme Court did. Join us next week. We're going to give you an update on what we know to be true. And then next week, we're going to tackle the second question that came about from our group, which was defunding the police department. Now, you heard a lot about the police department today at our President Obama's virtual town hall meeting. Can't wait for 8. I'm going to post that on our More Radio Network page to get you ready for our conversation next week on how do we defund a police department. Can communities engage in community policing? Can a community police itself? We're going to talk about all of those things, and all of those things we're talking about this afternoon on our President Obama's virtual town hall meeting. He discussed that. One of the panelists discussed, can we as a community police ourselves? And when they talked about the violence that goes up from all of the policing, I thought about you, Dr. Ivey, as they were talking about all of the police being in schools and how that has really impacted student learning and trajectory of what's happening to students there in our schools. So next week, next Wednesday, right here at 6 p.m. on More Radio Network, we're giving you a time to pray, settle our souls, information, so we can make a change. I believe that the three of those together, those are some powerful tools that will help us make a change. So as we close out, let's have some closing words from our listening audience. And from our guest. All right, we'll start with you, Kenyatta. Any last words?
I just want to thank you for, having this program, this show, and for lifting up, solution-based. That's what we need, solution-based. And I will definitely, if you invite me next week, I will definitely be there next week on how to defund the police and some real tangible things that we have in Black Lives Matter.
Absolutely. So we'll see you here next week. Absolutely. Don't go anywhere. I want everybody to stay in their seat if I had my way. Annette.
Yes, this has been wonderful. This is so needed. And this is, if I'm invited back next week, just continuing this conversation, stay informed, stay alert, read everything. and just keep alert of your surroundings so that you know what you're fighting for and how to fight back. Very important.
Absolutely. And of course, you're all invited back next week. Everyone. Dr. Ivey.
Dr. McNeil, I want to just remind the audience, if you're not at the table, you are on the menu. Right now, we have just given you a word to put yourselves at the table, to contact your congressman, contact your mayor, contact your elected officials in your area, start running for office, start sending money and funds to campaigns of folks who are believing and pushing for policies that you want to see. Next week, when we start talking about the Color for Change and Campaign Zeros, 8 Can't Wait, we'll start connecting you all with individuals who are pushing those policies, and then we can start looking at which politicians or individuals are supporting it. So who's supporting us? Because again, if you are not at the table, you are on the menu, and it's too long we've been on a menu.
Absolutely. And last but not least, my beloved Dr. Walker.
I just wanted to say that one of the things that we need to really consider for how this affects mental health, when we talk about trauma, we're thinking about people who are feeling like they have no way of enacting any kind of control over their lives when it comes to this. You know, there are posts going around about all these different ways in which they tell you to respond to the police, none of which have saved anyone from the police when they do what they do. But now we're talking about the how. How do we actually do something that does take back some of that power? How do we take back some of that control? So I believe that this is a most important conversation because it does talk to us about having some agency, having some power, and having some ways, some actual boots on the ground ways to make some change in terms of what is happening in our nation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want you to join us, all the 5 of us here next Wednesday at 6 p.m. as we talk about equity and inequality here in our country. My name is Dr. Anissa McNeil, and you've been listening to More Radio Network. Thank you.